Hello, thank you for joining me today again on the Church History Trail. We're continuing here in GRACEHILL Moravian Settlement, and where we are actually is we're in GRACEHILL Moravian Church, and I think you will agree it's a beautiful church. It's absolutely adorable, as you can see. Absolutely fantastic. And who we have here is the minister, Sarah Groves. I think I've got your name right, Sarah.
You have, Mark.
And so how long have you actually been in this church then?
I've been minister at GRACEHILL since August 2011.
And you have, I see down the back there, which we will have a wee look at shortly, is you've got the roll of ministers.
That's right, yes.
It's always good to have that, because what you can do then is you can trace the very first minister to the present day minister. Now, I have noticed two windows there, Sarah, which are absolutely beautiful. And they also have wee inscriptions, medallions on them of gentlemen. Can you tell me a wee bit about the windows, and then could you tell me quickly just a wee bit about each individual on them windows, please?
Of course. The windows are beautiful. They're clunky windows, and the medallions come from Dublin Moravian Church. They were brought here in 1956, and the medallions were actually made by quite a famous artist down in Dublin. I've written her name down, Ethel Rind, and she was part of the Tower of Glass, stained glass studio in Dublin. And these windows, these medallions, were actually originally in the Moravian Church in Dublin.
They're absolutely fantastic. And not only are they just windows to let light in, but they also tell a history.
They do.
Don't they? And you could maybe tell us a wee bit about that history, Sarah.
Right. John Wycliffe is the one here, bottom right, and he was an incredibly influential church reformer in England in the 1300s. And his writings went across Europe. His writings went to Prague, where they greatly influenced Jan Hus, who's the top medallion. He was the rector of Prague University. He was so influenced by Wycliffe's writings that he said that the people should hear the Bible in their own language, and they should be able to receive the bread as well as the wine. Jan Hus, unfortunately, was burnt at the stake at the Council of Constance in 1415. But his work so influenced people in what's now Czechia that followers of his started up what became known as the Unitas Fratrum in 1457. And what you have here, the bottom medallion, is the most famous bishop from the early Moravian Church, Jan Amos Comenius. And Comenius was not only a great bishop in the church, he was also an educator. He eventually, and his group, became exiles in Poland. They had to leave the Czech Republic. But his writings went across the world, and he was the first person to put pictures into textbooks. He believed that education shouldn't be beaten into children, and that girls should learn as well as boys. And
to say it's actually easier to remember if you can see, hear,
right,
and say.
Definitely. Multi-sensory teaching.
That's it. Now, one thing about Hus, I believe that's where we get the saying, your goose is cooked.
You like telling the old stories.
I love telling that story, because a lot of people don't know that John Hus, because of him being from, the name means, obviously, Hus is goose, and then he was from Husnik, which is goose town in English, and so because, as you say, he was martyred for his faith in 1415, is where we get the term, your goose is cooked. So, can you tell us about the other window then?
Yes, come across. So, what we have here is Zinzendorf in the bottom left-hand corner. Now, I said that Comenius left the Czech Republic and fled to Poland and actually wandered all across Europe. This was the time when the Moravian Church was being greatly persecuted. But by the 1700s, some refugees from the Czech Republic, from the Moravian Church, the Unitas Fratrum, escaped into Saxony, which is Eastern Germany. And there they were able to make a village, a little settlement called Herrnhut, on the estate of Count Nicholas von Zinzendorf. And Nicholas von Zinzendorf became greatly influenced by the group of refugees on his settlement. He eventually became a bishop of the Moravian Unity. So he's a link bishop from Comenius in the old era of the Moravian Church to Zinzendorf in the new era of the Moravian Church. And there's also there Peter Böhler, who was very influential in the spiritual life of the Wesleys. He was a wonderfully spiritual man. And the person at the top is my personal hero, John Cennick. John Cennick became very involved with the Moravian Church during the Great Awakening with Wycliffe and with the Wesleys in the 1700s. And Cennick came over to Ireland. He had a burning desire to come to Ireland. He came to Ballymena in 1746 and got beaten very badly for his troubles. So went back down south, but came up again in 1748 and preached all around this area. Now, sadly, Cennick never saw Gracehill built because his little settlement was out the other side of a hockle at Glunan. And Cennick died aged only 36 before Gracehill was leased to build a settlement on.
And as you say, I recognised that name, and I couldn't remember where I recognised it from, Peter Böhler. And yes, you, just as you said it, I remember, because Peter Böhler actually invited Wesley, John Wesley, who became one of the founders of Methodism. He invited him to a Moravian meeting, and John, of course, had no assurance of salvation. And he went to that meeting, and one of the Moravian ministers was actually reading from Martin Luther on Galatians, the commentary on Galatians. And Wesley actually said that he felt his heart strangely warmed.
Yes.
And full assurance of faith came in to Wesley. So the Moravians had a big impact on the Wesleys, and then on the revival as well.
Yes.
And also then, obviously, Wesley, when he was going to Georgia, he was almost drowned. There was a storm at sea, but he noticed as he was panicking that the Moravians were singing, and he couldn't understand this. So, and yet he was a minister.
Yeah.
He was a minister in the established church, but yet no assurance of faith. And so it's great to have the assurance, isn't it?
Yes, and the example of those people on the ship is a wonderful example. Though if I'm being honest, I'd probably be too busy being sick over the side.
Well, I have to say, I'm not a great swimmer, so I'd probably end up like Wesley. And then we have the roles here then for the ministers. If you could
Yes,
just explain those quickly, that would be great.
So we have the role of ministers here right from the beginning. So Peter Sims was the first minister at Gracehill, and 1759 is the date when this area of land was leased from Lord O'Neill. And 1765 is the date that the church was opened and the Single Sisters House. So he was the minister here during all the planning stages of Gracehill, because all the planning went backwards and forwards to Germany. And what you've got on this list of ministers is an indication of how widespread the ministers came from, because people in the Moravian Church travelled widely. So they were moved by church headquarters from one place to another. So Sephert, I think, is German. Shawkirk is German. I think Steinhauer is Latvian. Bernard, I think, is German. Traneker is Danish. You can see by all that Reichels are German. You can see by these names that people moved all over the place. So people would come here for a short time to be minister, and then they'd be moved on to somewhere else. And I wish we had a board as well of the head teachers, of the principals of the girls and the boys' academies, because they too were moved about all over the place. So it's a wonderful record of the ministers here. It's a real honour to be on that board.
So we actually have Peter, how do you pronounce that? Sims?
Sims, yes.
Sims, and he actually is from 1759 to 1765.
Yeah.
And then right up to the present day, which is yourself, Sarah Groves. 2011, and you're still in ministry.
Yes.
That is some amount of history in those two boards.
It really is.
It certainly wouldn't take you as long reading those two boards as it would actually those people living the ministry out.
Yes.
Fantastic. And I've also noticed here that you would thought that the pews would have went long ways across, but they're not actually.
No, this is quite a Moravian tradition to have a church horizontal rather than long ways. And that is to do with the idea of community. So people would sit, this was brother's side, and over there was sister's side. The men would come in through this door, the women through that door, and they would sit in their sex selected groups here. And there was a proposal in the 1800s to turn the church round, because church furniture has fashions just like clothes have fashions, and it became the fashion to have long churches because it's easier to preach in a long church. Your voice carries further. But thankfully they resisted the suggestion here and kept to the old layout. So we don't sit separately nowadays, but it's a lovely reminder of our history.
And I see you have a beautiful pulpit there.
It is.
Can you tell me a wee bit about that?
I don't know a lot about the pulpit. We are in the middle of our World Heritage bit.
Yes.
And as we've been uncovering history, so we've realised there's much more history to uncover.
Yes,
so
you just want to turn around there?
Oh yes, certainly. So I don't know a lot about the pulpit, except to say that it's a beautiful tulip or wine glass design.
Yes, it's lovely. And I see you have the motto there.
Yes.
Our Lamb was conquered, we will follow. How long has that actually been the motto of the Moravians? Do you know, Sarah?
I have no idea. Again, that's another thing that we've all just accepted it. But hopefully the World Heritage bid will find lots more things out.
That's maybe something that I could search and try and find out myself. Now, one thing that a lot of people will not realise, and I see that you still have it, you have the pulpit in the centre of the room, and a lot of people actually don't realise that the reason why we have the pulpit in the centre of the church, of all churches, is because before the Reformation, of course, the priests were sacrificing priests. But with the Reformation, then they became ministering priests, and they done away with the sacrificing table and just had a plain table for the Lord's Supper. And so the ministering priests meant that instead of the Mass or the communion being the central, that the actual preaching of the Word of God became central. And so that's why we have in most churches anyway, that's why we have the pulpit in the centre. It's because of the focus on the Word of God, you know. So that's fantastic. Is there anything else that you would like to point out to us, Sarah? What about the mouldings here? That's absolutely beautiful, so they are.
Stunning, aren't they?
They're lovely.
We're not sure when they were done, and there's so many questions. You think you get to an end of history, and then you realise you've only just begun.
I've had that experience many times. You're chasing a lead, and the next thing is it leads to about 3 other leads.
I know. I can tell you a bit about the organ. I absolutely love the organ. Now, this is the second organ in GRACEHILL. GRACEHILL was the first place to have an organ in Ballymena. It had its first organ. It arrived in Belfast from Bristol in 1781. I'm reading it just to make sure I've got my dates right. And it was placed in the church because the minister hoped it would help the congregation singing for some time has been somewhat flat. Brilliant, isn't it? So it was the first organ in, and people from all around came to hear it.
So this was the first organ in
in GRACEHILL.
What about Ballymena?
In Ballymena.
Ballymena?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
First organ in Ballymena. And then we got a new instrument in 1829. And again, it came up from Bristol. And there were organ builders in Bristol who were connected with the Moravian Church. So I think that's the connection why it came from Bristol. And it's a beautiful organ, and we've recently had it completely restored by Michael MacDonald and son from Glasgow, who were organ builders.
That's fantastic.
And the pipes were painted just very simply with gold paint. But it is a lovely organ. It's a very light organ. It's not like the heavier Victorian organs, so it's got a beautiful light feel to it.
In my own church, I actually play a 10-stringed instrument, which is my clapping hands, because I can't play a guitar or anything. But so is there any other type of music that you would have in the church then?
We've got piano, we've got a really nice piano. Sometimes we would have, just trying to think, not trumpet. But we don't generally have other music.
I actually did see a trumpet in the, I think it was a trumpet.
Oh yes, those are trombones. The
Trombones, sorry.
Yes, the Moravians were in the past very good on music. So it was an important part of life here, and everybody learned to play musical instruments. Yes. And they would have been a trombone choir. And lots of Moravian churches in the States still have trombone choirs.
Fantastic.
So yes, that's a bit of heritage from our past.
Well, thanks very much, Sarah. I've thoroughly enjoyed today, and I have to say the favourite part that I have is the 2 windows.
They are beautiful.
The windows are beautiful, and the history is absolutely fantastic. So again, thanks very much for the tour of the church, and thanks for watching. Again, if you enjoyed the channel, then please like and subscribe. God bless.